So, before I begin, let me say that after hours upon hours of playing this game, I felt as though I had mastered it. I would get to a certain point in every game where pure numbers dictated I would steamroll the rest of the continent, which became not so fun anymore. I was looking for a different kind of gameplay when I downloaded Darth Mod, turned the difficulty all the way up, and began playing as minor nations. This is the story of Persia, and the very last campaign I played. A word of note, I used Darth Mod to increase the number of cannons in a unit, as well as the overall size of all units. It also changed the AI considerably and made them much harder to fight, and added some changes like making garrison units tougher. So after all the world conquest games before, in this one I decided to pursue diplomacy and trade in what would be dubbed the macroeconomic strategy. For every penny I earned, the highest priority was reinvesture into the economy. To this end, I shelled out money and promises like a madman to get trade agreements and alliances from my neighbors. No price was too high to meet, and no boot too dirty to lick. Except for one. The Ottoman Empire. Sensing weakness in me because of my lack of an army, damn upkeep, the Turkish bastards swarmed over my borders in a bold attempt to seize my capital. Immediately, I began to train massive units of militia as reinforcements, and drove the invaders back as my allies entered the fray as well. With skillful application of cavalry and camelry, the mighty Persian counterattack was able to carve into the heartland of the Ottoman Empire and secure a peace at the expense of two territories. Hate and envy clouded the judgment of the Turk, for instead of focusing on my much weaker allies or their enemies to the north, they once again declared war on me less than a year later. Once more, the militias were levied and sent off to fight the invader with their pitchforks and be conveniently killed off before they could collect their meager pay. This would be how the decades-long Egyptian wars would play out. While the common man and his masses fought and died to delay the superior Turkish armies, a small host of veteran Persians would pounce on an unprotected province or three and seize them with brutal efficiency. One or two of these provinces would be ceded back to the Ottomans in order to secure a temporary peace before tempers flared and the drums of war beat again. Bit by bit, the Ottomans were whittled away, until my armies besieged Istanbul itself. However, while the Turk had exhausted himself with meaningless wars against his brother Muslim, the Persian Empire had grown stronger than ever. More ports allowed them to broaden their trading contracts and begin competing in the trade theaters, while her infant infrastructure had matured into a well-developed trade-based economy. Combined with low army upkeep, the money was rolling in. With this prosperity and trade came technological advancement. The Persians had attained canister shot, and the world of warfare would be changed forever. The Ottoman commander no doubt chuckled as he looked over the small force of Persians besieging Istanbul from the nearby hills. Such a small army would never be enough to break the walls of his city, and the impudence of the Persians knew no bounds. He would sweep them from the field of battle with his stack of janissaries and musketmen, and teach them a lesson in overconfidence. As the Ottomans sallied forth from their gates, the combined force of missile and melee cavalry and camelry, swept down and annihilated the enemy cavalry in a bloody sortie, and fell back to the cannons before the enemy infantry could respond in kind. As the cavalry reformed on the hillside, the big guns started to boom, as the unsupported Janissaries began their long walk up the hill. The Persian forces were arrayed at the top of the hill, 2 units of cannon flanked by a unit each of militia and dervishes. Time and again, the Ottomans would charge up the hill, only to be broken by the roar of canister shot, and the counterchange of screaming dervishes and scared militiamen. The courage of these Janissaries was something to behold. But as the missile cavalry moved to flank them, their doom was ensured, and the enemy was routed. The gates to Istanbul lay open, and the Ottoman Empire was relegated to a weakened buffer state in southeastern Europe. They would, of course, attempt to reconquer their territories from time to time, but a half-stack of cannons and cavalry would be all the Persians needed to protect their one non-allied border. This battle group would become a mainstay of the Persian armies. Cannons and cheap melee units, backed up by a strong force of missile and melee cavalry and camelry. Standard procedure was to use the cavalry to destroy the enemy cannon and cavalry at the outset of the battle. Once their infantry was left unsupported, the survivors would fall back to the cannon emplacement and pound them into oblivion. The first order of battle was to make the enemy walk to you. The Persian Empire had been quite careful to maintain a good reputation during the Egyptian wars, and was rewarded with a plethora of allies, mostly Islamic nations. However, while the Persians were grinding down the Ottomans, the Maratha Confederacy were threatening to eliminate Mysore and the Mughals, both valuable trading partners and allies. The Persians began infusing their allies with constant gifts of cash while training an expeditionary force to relieve them in the war against the infidel Marathas. Suffice to say, dumping money into your allies can actually work, and with the help of the expeditionary force, the Indian subcontinent was reconquered. The southern tip was redistributed to Mysore, and the northern regions to the loyal Mughals, with the Persians only keeping 2 coastal provinces for their own governance. With allies on all sides except one and numerous trading ports, the next step towards world domination was invasion of the trading theaters. With ample coffers to avoid ships, this was easily achieved by forcing the Ottoman navy off of their spots and by eliminating the pirate threat. With Persia's sterling reputation and booming economy, a golden age of influence began, wherein her trading partners numbered 16 to 21, depending on the current state of world war and new nation emergence. Great Britain began invading Mysore and the Mughals, but constant infusions of coin and the sharing of technology with my allies prevented them from gaining any footholds there. Such was the wealth of my empire that Christian nations began begging to join my alliance. This led to a surprisingly stable world order governed by an extensive network of trade and alliances, in which Persia subtly guided the course of world events by funding proxy wars, sometimes against countries allied with them or with one of their allies. As new nations emerged, Persia would always be the first to recognize them and offer them all the cash and technology they demanded in return for trade. It was sometime in the 1750s when I stopped playing. Besides the proxy wars and arbitrary nation building, I had run out of things to spend money on. I could have taken over the world, but then who would I have traded with? This recording has been brought to you by my kind supporters over on Patreon. Thank you all for your support.